All right, while you guys are eating, I'm really excited to invite our keynote speaker to the stage, Thibault Manekin. I don't know if I told him this when I asked him to speak, but from the moment that Thibault needed to be our keynote. When I asked him, he agreed without hesitation. And even before I read his book, Larger Than Yourself, even before I read his book, and if you haven't read it yet, you should. I knew that all that his company stands for is the key to our ability as an industry to attract top talent into this industry. Thibault and the rest of his team at Seawall know that as an industry, we have a responsibility to make the world a better place than how we found it. No other industry can make the claims that ours can. Without us, none of this would exist. You wouldn't be sitting in this building. You wouldn't have been born in a hospital. You wouldn't have been at a school if it wasn't for everyone in this room. But I often think that we forget that in our marketing. We're making the world a better place as we build it. And your employees know this. The research actually shows that women and Gen Z, as we talked about earlier, actually care about the effect they're making with their jobs. They care more than just the paycheck, and they want to make sure they're working for somewhere that matters. So with that, please join me in welcome Thibault to the stage.
And this is my clicker. Hello. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? How was the morning? Yeah? How many total panels were there? What? Oh, the whole morning was one panel? I got you. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really kind of honored to be here today. I want to have a pretty free-flowing conversation with you guys. And I think a little bit of the theme is going to be around the intersection, as kind of Jennifer was alluding to, around our purpose, right? The reason that we wake up every morning, where that intersects with the work that we do every day. We're constantly in search of that, and especially this next generation is always looking for it. So I'm going to ramble through some stories here that have been my lived experiences that have kind of shaped how I have seen my purpose kind of grow, and how we've brought that in full circle into the real world experiences that I get to do every day. A little disclosure, half of it will have nothing to do with real estate, okay? So maybe we can take a little bit of a break from that. So I grew up in Baltimore City, and from a really young age, I had two incredibly formative experiences that shaped the life trajectory that I would go on and take. And the first one was I was about 10 years old, and we were wrapping up a family dinner, and I have three younger sisters, and my parents put my three sisters to bed, and they asked me if I wanted to stay up later and watch a movie with them. So at 10 years old, I don't know if you guys remember, that's a huge deal to be asked to stay up later with your family. And so my sisters go to bed, we sit on the family couch, and my parents put on the movie Mississippi Burning. I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen that movie, but it's a really heavy, powerful movie. It takes place during the Civil Rights Movement in the Deep South in Mississippi. And there's a scene around about halfway through that movie where there's a mob of the Ku Klux Klan that is gathered outside of this black church, and they're just kind of hiding behind the trees. The church ends, and the parishioners come out, and the mob attacks them. It's an incredibly violent scene, and towards the end of it, there's this little boy in there where he appears to be kneeling on the side, just kind of like praying that I assume that he wants this all to end. And this guy from the Ku Klux Klan comes up, and he kicks this young boy in the head as hard as he can. And that's all that I could take at 10 years old. It's probably too much of a movie for me at that point. And I sprint up to my room, and I bury my head in my pillow, and I'm hysterically crying. And all I remember is my mom comes up, and she sits on the side of the bed, and she puts her hand on my back, and she doesn't say anything, she just holds space. She allows me to feel everything that I'm feeling in that moment. And what I remember is that it was the first time that I began to ask myself, why are we so divided as human beings? How is it possible that, based on the true story that this movie is, that something as trivial as the color of our skin could lead to something that I'm just seeing like this? And so this question begins to grow in my heart of why are we so divided as human beings? The second experience happened a few months later. My parents put us in the family station wagon, and they said we were going to go participate in this really special day. And so we go, and I have no idea where it was. We pull over the side of the road. There's hundreds of cars. And my dad says that we're there to participate in Hands Across America. Anybody here are old enough to remember Hands Across America? So it was this day where like Americans, millions of them, were going to link hands from the East Coast all the way to California, right? And so we get out and we take our place in line, and I'm holding hands with complete strangers. As far as you can look to the left or the right is this sea of human beings. And I began to ask myself, what is this force? What is this one thing that has brought millions of people together for the same thing at one point in time? And this second question begins to grow inside me, which is, what are the creative ways that we can bridge divides, right? So at about 10 years old, I started asking myself almost every day these two questions. Why are we so divided? And what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? So I go through high school in Baltimore, middle school, and every year that goes by, I find more reasons why I need to continue to ask those questions. I feel further away from the answer. Eventually, I go off to college. The world gets a little bit bigger, and I graduate, and I feel further away from the answer to those two questions than when I started. And I really believe, this is my lived experience, that we have two choices in life. We can sit on the sidelines, hoping that somebody else is going to do the heavy lifting. We can sit in the comfort of our bubbles, hoping that someone else, scrolling through our social media feeds, watching the news, loving or hating on whatever it is that's going on, but in the comfort of our own bubbles, not wanting to get our hands dirty, not wanting to actually get into the conversation. Or we can realize that life is really short. And the other option is that we want to become a part of the solution and not the problem. And while we might not know what the second or third step is, we're going to take the first step to begin to see where that alignment is. So upon graduating, me and two friends decided to start an international organization called Peace Players. And the idea was that we were going to go to war-torn countries, deeply divided countries, and we were going to use sports, in our case, the sport of basketball, to bridge divides, develop leaders, and hopefully over time change perceptions. So we went around to friends and family, and we started to raise money. And we raised about $8,000, which at like 22 years old felt like $1 million. Like the world believed in this idea. It was enough money to get on a plane to South Africa right after the fall of apartheid. And so we had spoken with a bunch of South Africans before going over. Most of them told us that the idea would never work, that where we were going was dangerous, that whatever we do, we should not stop in poor Black communities or be careful of this and that. And that negative, almost toxic narrative began to get tuned out, right? We were so focused on the power of the early stages of this idea. So we show up in the city of Durban to kind of test this idea out. And we start dribbling basketballs in the Black townships, in the rural areas, the affluent white suburbs. For those of you who haven't been to South Africa, it's an incredibly divided country. And sure enough, the kids, and basketball is a brand new sport there, are falling in love with the program. They can't get enough of it. The schools want more. We're being invited to participate more. The coaches who are coming out of the woodworks to participate because they have a chance at changing the narrative that has existed in their country for centuries, right? We didn't show up there saying we've got the answers and the solutions to solve all this. We basically showed up and said, we know how to dribble a basketball, and we want you guys to use this tool to grab the attentions of the future generation and push forward whatever message is really important to you all in this moment. So the program's exploding, right? We're at about the 3-month mark, and we've run out of money, just about. That apparently that $8,000 goes pretty quick. And the phone rings, and it's Nelson Mandela's. I always forget I have slides here. This is us in the program. And the phone rings, and it's Nelson Mandela's foundation. And they say that President Mandela is a huge believer in the power of sports to unite. And he wants to become your organization's largest sponsor. So we go from like zero credibility, barely any money left in the bank account, to not only Nelson Mandela's name behind us, not only his money behind us, but more importantly, his name and his credibility. And from that moment on in South Africa, the floodgates completely opened. Companies wanted to fund us. We were invited to replicate it all over the country. And then we were invited to replicate the model all over the world. So we were invited to the Middle East to work with Israeli and Palestinian kids, in Northern Ireland with Protestant Catholic kids, in Cyprus and Yemen. Today, the program's worked in over 22 of the most divided countries on the planet. We worked with over 100,000 kids. It is amazing the work that Peace Players continues to do. So for, I guess in my early 20s, for 6 or 7 years, I lived out of a backpack, and I would hop from country to country, listening and helping to set up the infrastructure for the program. Somewhat unexpectedly in 2006, because I never thought I'd come back to Baltimore, I ended up back in Baltimore. I was visiting family, but I started to feel the need to explore what was going to be next, right? This first kind of leg of my professional life had been in complete alignment with my purpose, right? Those two questions of why are we divided and what are the creative ways that we could bridge those divides? I woke up every day knowing that I was a part of the solution, that I was slowly but surely chipping away at it. So I get back to Baltimore, and I'm at this, back in my family's house, a beautiful home-cooked meal. I go to sleep in the bedroom that I've slept in hundreds of times before, and I literally can't close my eyes. There's something that's nagging me, that's really bugging me, and I can't figure out what it is. So I toss and turn the entire night, and the sun comes up the next morning. I haven't slept. I'm jet lagged. I'm cranky. I'm going through some culture shock, which I'd experienced before. And I don't really know what to do, but my instincts are to get in the car and just start driving. And I'm on 83. I don't know how many of you guys are from Baltimore City or familiar with it, but I get off at North Avenue and I head west. And my car pulls over at the intersection of Pennsylvania and North Avenue. This is in 2006. This is the intersection that 9 years later will be the epicenter of the Freddie Gray uprising. This is a part of Baltimore that I've been made to believe my entire life that I wouldn't be safe in and that I didn't belong in. True or not, that was the narrative that came to me as I was growing up. And here I was on this corner, and I go to open the door to walk around the neighborhood that day, and I kind of flinch. And the question that I begin to ask myself is, will I be safe? Is this right? And I shook that moment off because that was the narrative that we had heard around the world. You can't go to South Africa to do this. The program will never work. You can't go into this neighborhood. You can't go into Gaza. You can't go into the West Bank. You can't go into these parts of Northern Ireland or Yemen. Like, you won't be safe. The reality of it is what I had learned through all of the Peace Players' experiences, that true opportunity, true growth, the ability for us to answer those burning questions that are in us lay on the other side of our comfort zones, lay on the other sides of the bubbles that we live in. And if we can't get out of them, then we'll never really know the answer. So I get out of my car and I start walking around, and I see all of the things that society told me I would see. I see the broken down buildings, the abandoned homes, the liquor stores on the corners, the drug dealers, the clients of those drug dealers nodding off at the intersections. But I knew that there was so much more to this neighborhood that I hadn't been able to see, listen to, or really truly experience yet. And I continued to walk, and I guess about 5 minutes in, I had these two incredible realizations. The first one was that America, and particularly our city of Baltimore, are more divided than all of these so-called war-torn countries where I just spent so much time and energy in and resources in. We have an inability here to have open and honest conversations about our differences and even our similarities with people who don't look and feel like us. It's truth, right? And I saw that as a ticking time bomb. I had seen the conversations around the world and the ability to begin to break down those barriers, but I had never seen it in our own city. The second realization I had was that the real estate industry, and you began to hint at this, the real estate industry is the most powerful, connected industry on the planet. It touches every single one of us, every single moment of every single day, whether we're aware of it or not. I know you all are, but most of the world is not aware of it. There's this silent web that really kind of connects all of us. But the realization that I had in that moment was that even with that power and connectivity, this industry has done more historically to divide us and keep us apart than actually bring us together. And so with these realizations grew this anger, right? Here I was, like, I don't want to say wasted, but I spent all of this time in all these other cities. My family was in the real estate industry growing up. How can I have missed this? How is it possible that I've missed this my entire life? So I walk, jog, sprint back to my car to get a notepad and a pen to start taking notes around what it is that I'm feeling. And on the ride back, I call my dad. My dad is a hero of mine. He spent a long time in this family real estate business. And he got out because real estate became more about how much money you can make as fast as you could, rather than how you can really create community. And so he had gotten out and he had gotten into public education when I was launching the Peace Players program. And I invited him out for dinner. I said, I have something to share with you. And I kind of shared the experience that I had on North Avenue that day. And I asked him if he would consider starting a real estate company with me. But we kind of riffed back and forth for 3 hours over dinner that night around the only way that we would do this is if we were actually going to reimagine the real estate industry, right? Like, I'm a huge believer in the power of reimagining industries, taking things the way that the world is known to be one way and flipping it upside down where our purpose is more important than our profit. I had seen it done with basketball, right? Like at the end of the day, you might look at Peace Players and look at it as a basketball program. Basketball had like 5% to do with what we were doing. We didn't care how many shots a kid could make. We weren't looking to get him into college or get into pros or sign with agents. It was around how this one ball rolled between two kids who would never otherwise have spent time together could literally change the way the world turns. That was the purpose that we went around that idea. And so my dad and I started asking ourselves, what if we created a company that reimagined the real estate industry where we use buildings to empower communities, unite cities, and help to launch really powerful ideas? All of those things, again, are in direct alignment with those two burning questions that I ask myself every day. And we finished the dinner and got up, and as crazy as it felt in the moment, we gave each other a big hug and agreed that we were going to go. And we launched the next day a company called Seawall. And as a result of the work that my dad had done in public education, he had heard time and again that there were all of these teachers who were moving into Baltimore City, and they were having a hard time figuring out where to live, how to live with like-minded people, other teachers, that they weren't able to afford the high rents that they were seeing. And those teachers began to ask my dad, it'd be really neat if there's a cool, funky apartment building with discounted rents. We could all live together. We could cry and laugh together, keep each other motivated. And he'd been having similar conversations with a lot of the nonprofits that underpin the success of the school system, but they were in buildings all over town. What if they could all be under one roof? So we knew that the first idea that we would work on would be to try to find a building that would house some nonprofits and some teachers. But guys, like the idea was like maybe a 5,000 square foot building for a couple nonprofits, maybe a 4-unit apartment building for some teachers. And so we started looking around Baltimore, right? All of the neighborhoods that you would want to look in if you were going to do a new project, your Cantons, your Fells Points, Federal Hills, and we were striking out all over the place. We couldn't find a building. And about 3 months in, we're not sure if the company is going to make it. We've got nothing to show for this effort that we're putting in. And the phone rings, and it's my buddy Sam. And Sam says, look, I know you guys have been looking around for this building. This might not be exactly what you're thinking, but there is a 150-year-old tin can manufacturing building at the corner of Howard and 26th Street in a neighborhood called Remington. I, at the time, had never heard of the neighborhood of Remington before. And he says, Sam goes on to say, every developer, the building's been vacant for 30 years. Every developer in town has walked through the building and passed on it because nobody wants to touch it. Nobody thinks that it'll ever work economically. And a developer from DC had bought it a couple years back, got in a fight with the neighborhood, was trying to do high-end condos and couldn't get the project off the ground. And the bank was foreclosing on the building. And maybe we could step in and buy it. So look, at this point, the company's got nothing, no projects. Kicking the tires never hurt. So we agreed to meet Sam and the banker from, I believe, M&T Bank at the time, at the corner of Howard and 26th Street. It was not a sunny day like it is in this picture. It was gloomy and overcast, and the banker had not showed up yet. So my dad and I walked around the perimeter of the building, and we saw all of the reasons that people had passed, right? We saw the condition of the building. We saw the trees grown out of the roof, the windows boarded up. We saw the homes next to the building boarded up and vacant. This kind of like almost lifeless street. And then as we made our way back around, the banker had finally showed up. And he took one look at us and he said, are you sure you guys want to go in? And we said that we did. And he kicks open this huge wooden door in the back of the building. He's got one flashlight that he kind of like pokes inside. And there's these bats and pigeons that are flying around. And we take the first step in, and there was 2 or 3 inches of pigeon poop throughout the entire building. Like 3/4 of the space you couldn't walk in because the floor above had collapsed. There were mattresses that were surrounded by heroin needles and booze bottles and graffiti all over the place. And the banker's going off on the building. This place sucks. You would never catch me here after dark. This neighborhood's terrible. No one would ever live or work in here. Best thing you could do is knock this building down and forget about it forever. And I've heard this narrative. I've heard it around the world, right? The inability to see what something ought to be, with only the ability to see what's in front of you right there. And so I began to tune it out. And so we're continuing on the walk, and I'm looking at the building in a different light, with a different set of eyes. There's these massive, like 14-foot high ceilings, really cool heavy timber, beautiful historic exposed brick, massive window openings that today are boarded up but don't need to always be boarded up. And inside, I started to fall in love with this really cool building. So 40 minutes later, we're back on the street. I think the banker's still making fun of the building. And he leaves, and my buddy Sam leaves, and my dad and I look at each other, and we give each other another big hug, right? He has gone through that same transformation process inside. And we know that this is the building that is going to be our company's first project, right? So over the course of the next few weeks, we invite our most trusted advisors, developers who we know, people who have experience doing this. Our wives came for a tour of the building just to get a gut check, right? 10 out of 10 of the people who came said that it was a terrible idea, that it would never work, that we should run from this opportunity. We should focus on something not quite as big. This building's 100,000 square feet, something more manageable in a nicer part of town. But we had kind of like fallen in love already, right? So you remember when you fall in love when you're like 16 and you stop listening to any advice that your parents are going to give you? That was the experience that we had. But look, there's something really important about that no, can't narrative. As entrepreneurs, you're going to hear it every single day, multiple times. You're going to get more no's than you get into yeses. And while it's our jobs to kind of sort through those no's and push them aside and somewhat charge forward, there's a little bit of an art to it, right? Because there's a lesson in those no's. And again, I'd heard them around the world, the no's and can'ts. And so what we realized was that if we were going to pull this project off for these teachers and for these nonprofits, we were going to have to build it from the inside out. That was how we had built the Peace Players program. And there were so many people who didn't think that this was going to happen. We were going to have to create this groundswell where it became really larger than us. So So we begin the process, and for us, that idea of building from the inside out is: who are your end users, who is your community, and who is your team? So for us, the end users were really the teachers and the nonprofits. So we send out this email to about 1,000 Baltimore City public school teachers saying, anybody interested in creating stunning Class A apartments at a fraction of the cost in rent, meet us on the corner of Howard and 26th Street on some Saturday morning for a tour and a chat. So my dad and I show up there super early, really excited for the day. I was convinced hundreds of teachers were going to show up. Like, what an incredible invite, right? And by like 9:15, the last of maybe 10 teachers has shown up, trickled in, staring at this building, wondering what they're doing here on the Saturday morning. And I'll never forget this. My dad kind of hops up on a step and gives this impromptu speech welcome where he says, for several years now, I've heard your peers and your colleagues talk about how hard it is to find an affordable place to live with other teachers. We have no idea what we're doing, but we're at the early stages of this concept where, thoughtfully and inclusively brought to life, this building could be turned into everything that we have heard that you as teachers are asking for. And he kind of kept going with that spirit. And he asked them, so you guys ready to go in? And it was like a pep talk at a halftime where your team was down and the teachers were like, hell yes, let's go. And so we kicked down that same door. We had flashlights for every one of them. And the difference from this tour, from all of the other tours we had done, was that we were no longer the ones leading the tour. The teachers were like effortlessly skipping through the building. They were pointing out all of the things that we had seen, which the banker was incapable of seeing the high ceilings, the massive windows, the cool timber. And they were seeing that because at the beginning stages of that conversation, that process, my dad had shared in the pride of ownership and authorship in what was getting created, right? This wasn't his project or Seawall's project. There was an open invitation to mold this thing together, mostly driven by what the teachers were going to want. So we get out at the end of the tour. The teachers are like, I can't wait till we pull this off. This is going to be amazing. For the next 12 months, those teachers on a monthly basis met with our design team. They designed every square inch of their apartments. They chose their own amenities. We even let them choose their own rent based on what they thought was fair and what they could afford in a project like this. And so the teachers are all in, right? And the second group on this concept of building from the inside out is the community. Who are the other people that this project is really going to affect, but they might not actually be on a day-to-day basis inside of it? And so for us, that was the community that surrounded the building. We get invited to this neighborhood association meeting, and I'm all nervous. It's my first one, and we get invited to the front of the room, and my dad starts the conversation in a very similar way that he did with the teachers. He's like, look, we want to be really clear. Our intention is to come in as neighbors and not guests. And we understand that you are the ones who have been staring at this collapsing building for generations now. We have started to work with a group of teachers and nonprofits who want to create the country's first Center for Educational Excellence. We've looked in buildings all over town, and the one that we like and the teachers like the most is right here in your neighborhood. Would you be interested in working with these teachers and these nonprofits to have the country's first Center for Educational Excellence in your neighborhood? It was such a different conversation than the other developers who had showed up. Too often in our industry, especially in the development world, we go and we tell the communities that we're going to work in what they're going to get from us. And the concept is to change that narrative. How can development happen with and for communities and not to them? And so the hands were shooting up all over the room. This is amazing. So much better than that DC developer. We didn't want the high-end condos. Like, all this terrific feedback. And then all of a sudden, this young man in the back of the room kind of like defiantly raises his hand, and the room goes quiet. We call on him. He says, look, this is obviously great, and we're clearly excited about this. But the problem is you're going to build this, and unless you live or work in the building, you're never going to really be able to participate in the finished product, right? We're just going to stare at it from the outside. What if you guys took the corner spot there, and instead of putting the apartment that you think you want to put there, turn it into a little 1,200 square foot coffee shop? So I'm listening to this, and I'm like, this guy is nuts. Has he seen the corner of Howard and 26th Street? No one is going to walk here, ever, right? I couldn't think of a worse idea, and we've got a great apartment for 2 teachers to live in. Like, what else could you want? And I caught myself in that thought process because I sounded like the banker. I sounded like the people from around the world who had made up my mind on like what something was today and not understanding what it could be, what it ought to become. And so I kind of like pushed that aside, and we committed to really exploring that with the neighborhood. So after that first community association meeting, over the months that followed and the weeks that followed, almost every other night or so, several times per week, we were leading a tour. Anybody from the neighborhood that wanted to walk through the building and see what it was like before in its current condition, we invited them for it. And we really began to form these incredible relationships. The next group that's key in this concept of building from the inside out is the team. Who are the guardian angels that are going to be in your corner that have failed more times than you will ever succeed? They've done so much good, but they've also they've had so much life experiences, and that you want them in your corner because they're going to help guide you kind of every step in the way. So with the momentum created with the teachers and the community, we had some early sets of designs. There's some architects who were donating their time to this. We had some contractors who had begun to price it, and the pricing came back. This might be industry specific here. The pricing came back for the project, and it was $20 million, which was $19 million more than our first project should have cost. The problem wasn't the price tag. The problem was that because of our commitment to keeping the rents artificially low for the teachers and nonprofits, we could only afford a $6 million bank loan, which left a $14 million gap in the capital stack that we had to find a way to fill. So we call up Bart Harvey. I don't know if you guys know Bart Harvey. He's a disciple of the late Jim Rouse with Enterprise. And we invite Bart for a similar tour. We end up at this little diner after the tour. And my dad, we kind of say a little bit of the same thing, like, here's Seawall's purpose, right? Here's our mission. Here's what we're hearing from all these teachers in the community. There's so much momentum, but we have no idea how to pull this project off because we're short $14 million. And without flinching, Bart says, you have nothing to worry about. And he starts talking about historic tax credits. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that program. New market tax credits, a federal program that encourages commercial investment in low-income census tracts throughout our country. And he starts telling us about all of these different programs that we had no idea existed. And he says, I've got you. Just give me a week. That following week, the phone begins to ring off the hook with all of these tax credit investors and people that want to participate in this kind of Center for Educational Excellence concept. And before we know it, within a few months, that $14 million gap had been completely eliminated. All $20 million was in place to close financing. Miraculously, we closed financing in 2008, the week before Lehman Brothers collapsed. And we started construction. I don't know. This is a picture of the inside of the building. And we started construction. 3 months into construction, the building was 100% leased. By the time we 300 teachers waiting to get in, and over a dozen nonprofits that we had completely run out of space for. We hadn't spent $1 on marketing or advertising. The teachers had designed a small website that felt like they would resonate with their peers, and the word of mouth was what carried it forward. And it carried it forward in authorship. We were really clear that this wasn't our idea, and that we were going to share it with everybody that the idea touched. So here's the here's the building under construction, this old warehouse part that we ended up taking down. Here's the building completed, corner of Howard and 26th Street before the coffee shop moved in. Here's a look at an apartment that if you're a teacher, you could rent for their amenities that they needed, in their opinions, to kind of succeed. And as a result of the momentum, I would almost call it a movement that had been created, right, where the impossible became reality. We were invited to replicate the model in some other parts of Baltimore, in some other cities throughout the country. The reality of it is that every city on this planet should have a building that rolls out the red carpet for the people doing the most important work in our cities. Anybody focused on kids and education. And you can translate that further to nurses, first responders, right? There are incredible people that can't afford, feel like they're getting like first priority, and so we continue to listen, right, and continue to evolve. So fast forward, 15 years it's been since we've launched Seawall. We have completed or are in the process of developing over $500 million of really transformational projects. The neatest thing is that not a single one of them has been our idea. It's been as a result of deeply listening to the communities that we're blessed and honored to even be able to work in. And it's been such an amazing learning opportunity for us, kind of every step of the way. I think I've got some more pictures. So do you remember the little coffee shop that co-op group called Charmingtons opened up the doors, and it was everything that the neighborhood could have possibly dreamed of? I think 5 years or so, 7 years ago, President Obama came in for lunch randomly one day to this coffee shop. Imagine if, it had been an apartment, or if it had been a Starbucks or something like that. It would have never had that same feel. These are some of the other projects that we've done around housing. This is the Our House project. I'm not sure if any of you guys have visited that. We've built charter schools. This is Lexington Market. That slide didn't work out. This is our Lexington Market project, which had its soft opening, and that's probably a whole nother conversation. I think, there's been so many lessons learned along the way. One of the really important great ideas, right? Too often in life, we try to claim ownership, sole ownership of those ideas. And in our experience, when we don't share in the pride of ownership and authorship from the very beginning, we stunt that idea's growth, right? The more people who really, really believe that they're a part of the creation of something at the very early stage of it, the more support, the more push that idea is going to get, the more opportunity it has to succeed past our wildest dreams. The more we try to hold it for ourselves and control it for ourselves, in our opinion, that really does kind of stunt its growth. I think maybe in closing, and I want to open up to some questions, but as it relates to this conference, right? As it relates to this next generation of people that we're going to hire, people that we're going to inspire, people are going to come through our doors. I think a really neat thing for us at Seawall is that we don't hire anybody with any real estate experience because we're afraid they're going to come in with a preconceived notion of how this works. We hire teachers and social workers and event planners. The real estate piece is somewhat easy, right? It's the soul of the projects that really differentiate them. And I think that's really neat. You know, nobody at our company comes here so that they can build buildings, right? People come here because of the real clarity and the purpose of why the company exists, which for me is in total alignment with those first two questions that I talked about in the beginning, that I think about every day. Why are we so divided as human beings? And what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? And the purpose at Seawall around using buildings to empower communities, unite cities, and help to launch really powerful ideas is the things that bring in employees. Is the things that's the reason our company has been 100% back for the last year and a half, maybe almost 2 years, because everybody feeds off of each other's energy. Everybody's so excited, not necessarily about the buildings that are getting built, but for the people that they are getting built for, and for the change that those buildings will make on the neighborhoods that we're in and on the cities that we work in. So I think that that's really key. Each one of you knows your purpose, knows the reason that you wake up every morning, knows those burning questions that you're thinking about at night, figured out if you've got the answer to. Finding a way to connect them with what you do every day is going to make massive differences in your lives, in your companies, and in the people that are going to get to spend time with you. So thank you for having me, and I don't know if we've got time left, but happy to. Martin.
I'll be patient so everybody can hear me. So what inspired you to write your book?
Right. So I've obviously lived I've had some incredible experiences throughout life, and I've had the opportunity to speak a lot around the work that we've done in the beginning with Peace Players, now with Seawall. And when I would get off a stage and I would talk about these different ways to go about bringing ideas to life, I'd have people come up to me asking me to elaborate more about that as if I was speaking a different language, right? And to me, that was just how I was raised, and it was a little bit second nature. But enough people were asking questions that it caused me to think about it. And I would go back and I would take notes on the questions they would ask me, and I would take notes on my responses to those questions. Those notes became paragraphs. The paragraphs started to have some sort of formulation of a process in a chapter. And before I knew it, I had a whole handful of chapters that had begun that turned into a book. And I kind of think most of us have a book in us, right? It's a vulnerable and it's a little bit of an uncomfortable experience. You don't know how the world's going to receive it. But I had gotten to that point that I knew that as much as it scared me, I needed to see it through to the end. And just dove in on the process. It took about 5 years to write it. Had some incredible folks in my corner. You guys know Wes Moore running for governor, who wrote the foreword to the book. I sent him the first draft, and he read it, and he sat down with me and said, "This will never work. The way that you've written this, you're telling the reader what you want them to know. That is not how we learn. right? That is not how you develop. In order for this to resonate, you need to be more vulnerable. You need to tell the gripping stories from around the world that you have, and then the reader will take what they can from that, what it is that what they'll pull out from those lessons. And I think that was probably some of the greatest feedback that I ended up getting, and it went back and completely rewrote the whole thing with that. So it's 21 chapters or so, and each chapter is like an boots on the ground, pretty gripping story from the time living around the world to back in Baltimore, and the ups and downs, and highs and lows of entrepreneurship. And it really hopefully helps the reader understand how to reimagine industries, how to lead with purpose, and how to grow ideas in a really different way.
Thank you for hanging out with us today. Clearly, your story is very inspirational, and I think we can take away a lot of great ideas in our specific industry, really related to his story. I really have a funny question. Something just popped up when you were talking about asking your future tenants how much rent would be. Did anybody stand up and say 0?
If they did, I admittedly blocked that out. But it's funny. That's a huge question, and with that question comes a lot of trust and a lot of responsibility. And folks could have said 0 or $200, but we wouldn't have been on the same wavelength. Right here, we were really opening up ourselves to helping them create their idea. And I think they really understood the concept behind it, and they were really thoughtful about their answers. And I think they nailed the price point that they wanted to be at based on the amount that they make in the classrooms. So if they did, I don't remember. I think she stole the mic.
Sorry, I'll give it to you next. I have a question. One of my passions is the education system, and it needs to be turned upside down. What are your thoughts on where we should be in public education?
Yeah, look, I think everything from K through 12 public education to higher education needs to be completely reimagined. Higher education is a mess right now, not sustainable at all. The reality of it is that we are still teaching this next generation the same way we were teaching them 300 years ago. Teacher in the front, rows of students, maybe 30 in a room. Here's what I have to say. Here's what you need to understand. And that is not how we operate anymore as a world. But we've got this enormous ship moving forward that feels like it's impossible to turn. And there are neat charter schools out there going about it differently. There's obviously independent schools that are going about it differently, but not in a concrete enough way to move the needle for the masses. And a little bit is it because we're stuck in our comfort zones. It is so uncomfortable to think about radically changing how we teach our kids. Even though we teach our kids differently at home. Our kids are taught differently in sports and in the social places that they go. But in the classroom, we're still stuck on that old model. So I don't have the answer, but I completely agree that it's broken, and that absolutely needs a pretty radical change to turn it around. Thank you.
Thank you again for your story too. It's very inspirational. I've been an educator for over 30 years,
Thank
and
you.
I know from that group, they're solution finders, not problem namers. And it sounds like that was sort of what you did to get your momentum. You looked for like-minded solution finder groups, right? Now we're in a situation where we're working with the trades. We're working with individuals who are looking at lots of motivations for why they want to work. One of them is not always to make a difference in the world. How do you talk to young people and say you need to be that solution finder, not the problem namer?
It's a great question. I think that it's really kind of somewhat starts at the top of an organization, right? If the primary focus of the company is to sell parts, install parts, make money, that is going to translate all the way down, right? If there's a fundamental shift in the reason that the company exists outside of just the profit side of things, and from the top, that's really clearly articulated down, that ends up becoming the DNA of the company and ingrained in the younger generation, who I think would seek out that company more than their competitors. So we talk about this a lot. If I were to pull up the website of 10 real estate development companies, I can pretty much guarantee you that the majority of them would say, we exist to kind of maximize shareholder profit, right? Because that's what real estate has always been, you know? If you were to go to the Seawall website, and you would clearly see what the reason that we wake up every morning. If you're toggling between that, and you're trying to make a decision as a young person, especially this next generation who really is purpose-driven, then I think, at least our experience is that a lot of them are going to start to gravitate towards that other company. I want to be really clear, guys. Profit is incredibly important. You know, like we sit up here and we talk about purpose over profit. The reality is that the two of them have to be completely intertwined, because if we aren't running profitable companies, like all of the stuff we've done while we're leaving a lot of cash on the table because we're keeping our rents low, they do make money. Our company does make money. If it didn't, then we'd be out of business, and the tool that allows us to be in service of our purpose would go away. So there is that fine line of making sure that you're aligning the two, but even just a more overt and an intentional conversation around it from the top and throughout the company, I think could have a real impact on this next generation and where they choose to work, knowing that their employer, their team members are equally as passionate about something in addition to the bottom line. Thank you.